2022 was one hell of a year, but congratulations, you made it. What does 2023 have in store for you and for the world in general? In this video, I'm joined by one of the world's leading financial astrologers, Crypto Damus, and together we're going to take you through the major astrological developments of 2023, one by one. And we're going to try and cover a few bases. We're going to think about what these coming shifts mean for the world, what they mean for the markets, and what they might mean for you.
Why should you check out our 2023 forecast report? Because you want to know what the weather's going to be like in 2023. Astrology can't change the weather, but it can tell you whether to bring a raincoat or sunblock, what to pack in your bag as we head into this year of 2023.
Ready to go? And let's jump right into it.
So 2023, I'm calling it a year of transition, namely because number one, Pluto is slowly transitioning out of the sign of Capricorn and into the sign of Aquarius. Pluto only changes signs once every 15 to 20 years. So this is a big transition, and it's going to happen slowly between March 2023 and November 2024. Also, the nodal axis and the eclipses are also transitioning out of the Taurus-Scorpio axis and into the Aries-Libra axis. So I see this very much as a year of transitioning out of the pandemic period, but we're not quite into the new post-pandemic period.
Now, the first major shift we're considering already happened. Jupiter moved from Pisces into Aries, where it will remain until it leaves for Taurus on May the 16th. Now, Jupiter takes about 12 years to travel around the zodiac.
And typically speaking, Jupiter in Aries suggests a kind of a bold, fresh start, taking decisive action, a new beginning, right? Aries is that kind of prototypical fresh start, new beginning sign. However, there's a couple problems with this, which is that number one, the Aries ruler Mars is going to be in retrograde during the Jupiter ingress. And number two, Mercury goes retrograde about, I think, 8 or 9 days after the Jupiter Aries ingress. Starting the year really with both Mars and Mercury retrograde. You know, this kind of changes the meaning of Jupiter and Aries, which again, it would normally be this kind of bold, decisive action with a new beginning. However, I think that there's going to be a pause at the beginning of the year. And I think we're going to have to take our time, you know, during this overlapping Mercury-Mars period, which is December 28th through January 18th. I think we're going to have to pause and take our time and slow down and kind of reassess our goals and reassess our strategies. You know, I'm basically recommending that people not launch any big new events, which I normally kind of would, you know, at the beginning of the year would be a great time to launch events. But I'm saying to people to wait until after both Mars and Mercury are direct around January 18th, 19th. That's when you want to start to launch those new projects.
Jupiter is the greater benefic, the planet of expansion, of growth, of revelation. But when Jupiter is in Mars's sign, it's working with martial significations like action, assertiveness, conflict, and desire. So when Jupiter is in Aries, we might expect to see revelations about armed conflict, whether of the past or ongoing. Think of the war in Ukraine. The last time Jupiter was in Aries in 2010, WikiLeaks released 92,000 documents on the US's involvement in the Afghanistan war, which had been leaked by Chelsea Manning. Now we can see the theme of revelation there, but also courage. That's very Jupiter in Aries. Jupiter also tends to magnify and expand things it comes into contact with. So unfortunately, an obvious way to delineate Jupiter in Aries is expansion of conflict. The last time Jupiter was in Aries in 2011, the Arab Spring exploded across the Middle East. And the time before that, in 1999 and 2000, NATO gained several new members and intervened in the Kosovo War. This was the first time NATO attacked a sovereign state. And during the Second Chechen War, the Russian army flattened the city of Grozny. All of that is a pretty worrying omen for what's coming in Ukraine. There's already talk of Russia launching a new winter offensive, and that would fit with Jupiter moving into Aries. There's even been talk of Russia invading Ukraine from the north, possibly from Belarus. The idea of another front opening in the Ukraine war makes sense because the planet ruling Jupiter, Mars, is in the sign of Gemini, and Gemini is the sign of the twins, of duality. So this takes us to the next important development of the year, Mars's direct station on the 12th of January. Mars is currently retrograde in Gemini, and it's been so since about October the 30th. It signified a lot of mental wrangling, fights over ideas, bureaucratic hurdles. If you look to your own chart and see which whole sign house Gemini represents, you may well have had a battle of sorts on your hands in that area of your life.
This whole period of Mars retrograde has kind of been like, cycling into a headwind, right? You're working really hard, but you're not really making much progress. You're not getting anywhere. So that's going to change on January 12th. And we're going to start to feel that energy shift where things start to move forward again. We're not moving into that stiff headwind. And I think life is just going to feel a little bit easier. However, the problem is we still have to wait for Mercury to go direct on January 18th. When finally both Mars and Mercury are direct, that's really when, the new year is going to kick off.
Now, something to bear in mind about the direct station of Mars is the position of Uranus in the chart of the United States. Mars will station direct at about 8 degrees and 7 minutes of Gemini. In the Sibley chart, which is commonly used, Uranus is at 8 Gemini 2. This is a very sensitive point in the US chart, in the 7th house of relationships with allies and enemies. Combinations of Mars and Uranus tends towards the explosive. Mars will be in that same degree as the United States Uranus between January the 1st and the 24th, almost an entire month. That looks tumultuous for US foreign relations. That's something to watch. We're going to jump ahead now to March. March is going to be a huge month astrologically, with not one, but two massive shifts.
One thing I want to say about 2023 is that 2023 is very different from the previous 3 years of 2020, 2021, and 2022. Now, why is that? There's no really major, hardcore, stressful aspect patterns in 2023. So we've been through, a really difficult series of aspects over the past 3 years, right? We had this very rare Jupiter-Saturn Pluto conjunction that brought the pandemic. Then that was followed by this 2-year period of this hard Saturn-Uranus square, basically from February 2021 all the way to October 2022, essentially. Now in 2023, there's no major hardcore aspect alignments, right? The big story of 2023 is actually the planetary ingresses, outer planets changing signs. And in particular, March is probably one of the most interesting months because you get Saturn changing into Pisces, which happens every 2.5 years. But you also, a couple of weeks later, that's followed by Pluto's first ingress into Aquarius. March is going to be a very dynamic month, and we're entering a new era.
Firstly, we have Saturn moving into Pisces on March the 7th. Now, Saturn has been in its own sign since it ingressed into Capricorn in December 2017, and it moved into Aquarius for the first time in March 2020, when the pandemic was going off. So we've had a dignified Saturn for 5 years now, and haven't these been austere times?
The overall archetype of Saturn is very, very different than the archetypal picture of Pisces. This is a very awkward pair, right? And this is kind of the energy of Saturn and Pisces that we have to think about because, Pisces is this big picture dreamer. Pisces is all about transcending the limited individual ego, transcending, the confines of the material world. And Saturn is very much the opposite of that. Saturn is very much about practical hard work and, success in the material world. Right? I think you get a very awkward relationship between the planet and the sign. This could be difficult. I think Saturn, forces Pisces to come down and face reality, right? So that could be hard because we may have dreams or visions that can't be brought to fruition. However, if we can find a synthesis between the practicality of Saturn and the big picture dream of Pisces and somehow make them work together, we could have the best of both worlds. Okay. So you could be able to use this combination to actually bring your dreams and your ideals into fruition in the material world through the hard work, discipline, and focus of Saturn.
With Saturn in Aquarius, we saw a lot of work by governments to put systems in place aimed at managing the pandemic, including vaccines and technology aimed at managing public health data and controlling information and people's movements. Saturn in Pisces has something to do with drives towards making societies more coherent, more equal. It's less about technical fixes, as in Aquarius, and more about beliefs and ideology. The last Saturn in Pisces transit from 1993 to 1996 coincided with the end of the racist system of apartheid in South Africa, and the one before that, from 1964 to 1967, coincided with big gains for the civil rights movement in the United States in the mid-1960s. But at the same time, China was having its cultural revolution. Now, these may seem like completely different kinds of event, and in many ways, of course, they are. But there's an archetypal link here. I think it's to do with attempts to create societies with more coherence. So look for that this year and beyond with Saturn in Pisces.
We could see a lot of issues around immigration, I think. Like in the United States, there's a movement that wants to build a wall and not really let anyone in. And but we also have this great tradition of, people coming here for freedom and escaping political oppression and seeking asylum. How do you find that balance? And I think Saturn in Pisces, is going to bring up a lot of those issues.
Now, when Saturn was last in Pisces on the 5th of July, 1994, a website was born. It was called Amazon.com. Amazon is a company that seemingly wants to be the universal provider of all things to all people. It seems to want to become some kind of universal structure, unheeded by boundaries. That is Saturn in Pisces. So when Saturn gets into Pisces, Amazon will really be beginning its Saturn return. Now, you may have noticed there's more and more news at the moment of Amazon employees unionizing and going on strike. Expect the pressure on Amazon to build over 2023 in the lead up to the exact hit of Amazon's Saturn return in March 2024. Now, in the same month that Saturn moves into Pisces, Pluto will change signs from Capricorn to Aquarius, where it's going to spend the next 2 decades. And I have a video all about Pluto in Aquarius, which I did with S.J. Anderson. If you're interested, you can watch that one after this. But what you need to know is that this will be a revolutionary transit, when many of the institutions people around the world have come to rely on will be transformed. And they'll be transformed in line with the airy, informational, fast-moving nature of our times.
This is a very big change. Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008, and it's going to spend the next 20 years in Aquarius. Pluto is going to crisscross back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius 3 times over a period of 18 months. So this is just the first of 3 ingresses. And it's kind of like just dipping a toe in the water of Aquarius energy. We may not get the real effect of this until the final ingress in November of 2024, where Pluto stays in Aquarius for good. However, we should keep our eyes open to see the emergence of the new trends that Pluto's ingress into Aquarius is going to bring. So this is very much the end of an era that started in 2008. Pluto's entry into Capricorn started with the big financial crisis called the Great Recession and the subprime housing bust. That was followed by a period of about 10 or 11 years of bull markets. One of the longest periods of bull markets across the board for real estate, stocks, and cryptocurrencies. We saw the rise of cryptocurrencies. We saw the rise of central banks using an innovative new technique called quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is buying, right? They're buying US treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. They've been doing that. They have $9 trillion. They got $4 trillion during the Great Recession, and they, doubled down on quantitative easing during the pandemic with another $5 trillion. Now they've started a new regime of quantitative tightening, which is now they're trying to reduce that balance sheet. And so it does seem that quantitative easing has come to an endpoint. And that makes sense because it started with Pluto's ingress into Capricorn, and it seems to be reaching the endpoint with Pluto's, transition out of Capricorn. I think we're going to see really big changes in central bank policy because the quantitative easing, together with the fiscal stimulus that we saw, governments sending out checks, this created this inflationary problem that we have now. So going into 2023, right, 40-year high inflation is one of the main problems. The big question for 2023 is, can the Fed engineer a soft landing, right? That's one of the big questions. So in other words, can they bring down inflation without crashing the economy and financial markets? Or do they have to get very aggressive and really crash the economy in order to get inflation under control? And that's what happened, in the late 1970s, the last time inflation was soaring. So the Fed is kind of at an impasse right now. They've kicked the can down the road through quantitative easing, and it may be, that this game of monetary musical chairs is kind of coming to an end. So the question is, what new game are they going to start? What new tricks do they have in their bag? And I think one of the things we're going to see is, of course, these central bank digital currencies. So I think there is going to be, a new technological development in central banking. So now we're entering into a new period. What we can say, looking back at the last time that Pluto was in Aquarius, notably, was 3 revolutions, okay? The first was the Industrial Revolution. Pluto in Aquarius brought major technological innovations, especially the hydraulic press, which was the very beginning of industrial manufacturing, and more importantly, the steam engine, which revolutionized transportation and the economy. I think we're going to see something very similar with Pluto in Aquarius in this period, essentially from 2022 to 2042, where we see massive technological change, including, the rise of AI, robots coming off the screen from sci-fi movies into everyday life, virtual reality becoming more and more a part of our normal everyday reality. One of the things I'm hoping for is that we see a breakthrough in fusion technology. And in fact, interestingly, we just saw some headlines last week in early December that there have been some technical breakthroughs in the nuclear fusion technology, which promises unlimited carbon-free energy to solve the climate crisis. Another thing I'm looking at is quantum computing. I think that this is going to make some big leaps over the next 20 years, and this will be the next breakthrough in computing, and this has implications across the board for everything that computers are doing today.
So we're getting an interesting combination in 2023, Saturn in Pisces and Pluto in Aquarius. When was the last time we had that combination of sign placements? Well, it was between 1788 and 1791. And you might recognize that period of history as kind of important. It was when the French Revolution happened in 1789, and the United States established its governing institutions: Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court, the Constitution. So where can we expect to see revolutionary transformations playing out?
We're already seeing signs of those taking place in places as far-flung as Iran. There's a people's movement that the authoritarian religious regime has not been able to stop. We saw unprecedented popular uprisings in China recently. And even in Russia, we saw, anti-war movement. So will these authoritarian regimes be able to continue these brutal crackdowns to suppress these movements? If I were Putin and Xi Jinping and the supreme leader of Iran, I would be worried about Pluto's ingress into Aquarius.
And it's also worth noting that in the chart for the declaration of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the ascendant is at 1 degree of Aquarius, and the moon, signifying the people, is at 3 degrees of Aquarius. Now in 2023, Pluto won't reach the China ascendant, but it will get pretty close. I think we can expect to see widespread disruption in China. We're already seeing suggestions of that now, as Beijing has relaxed its zero COVID policy in the face of mass protests across the country. Unfortunately, Pluto may also be signifying the effect of the COVID-19 virus as it washes over the population of China. One of the systems I'm watching most closely is the international financial system and a move towards a more multipolar world. Now again, this won't happen overnight, but watch for developments in this direction over 2023. Now after this tumultuous March, we enter eclipse season. On April the 20th, we have a solar eclipse in Aries, the first in Aries since 2015, and on May the 5th, we have a lunar eclipse in Scorpio, the final one in Scorpio for many years.
Eclipses, of course, can bring very dramatic events and big changes. This year, the nodal axis, which is what the eclipses are based on, is going to be also transitioning out of the signs of Taurus and Scorpio. Taurus and Scorpio is very much about trying to find stability and hold on to the status quo versus letting go and embracing change. I very much see that as the themes, over the past 18 months of the eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. So this is going to be a pretty dramatic shift into the signs of Aries and Libra, where the theme is going to be very different. The theme is going to be much more about how do we balance the needs of ourself, which is represented by Aries, versus the needs of others, which is represented by Libra. So that's going to be more, I think, of the changing dynamic that we're going to see with the eclipse pattern in 2023 and 2024.
So the first eclipse of the year will be a solar eclipse on April the 20th.
And that's going to be at 29 degrees of Aries. Now, the interesting thing about this eclipse is that it's going to be in a very tight square to Pluto, newly entered into Aquarius. Now, this is what we call an out of sign square, but it's still under 1 degree of orb. So it's very tight and it's going to be very powerful. And it's going to activate this new energy of Pluto and Aquarius. And I'm especially concerned about the markets and cryptocurrencies during this period of time because squares to Pluto often bring breakdowns and destruction of the obsolete structures. It could be market structures, economic structures. So I'm definitely concerned that this would be a very challenging, stressful alignment. This is followed by the May 5th lunar eclipse at 14 degrees Scorpio. This is going to be the last eclipse in Scorpio for 9 years. This eclipse is interesting because it's going to be roughly still opposing Uranus, okay? Oppositions to Uranus bring chaotic, unexpected, turbulent events and dramatic sudden breakdowns and crises. This is very similar to the energy of 2022, where we saw the eclipse patterns was either conjunct or opposing the planet Uranus.
Eclipses are times when we see the light of the luminaries blocked out. Last year, during the eclipse seasons that were activating Uranus in the financially oriented sign of Taurus, we saw the fall from grace of two old luminaries of the crypto world, Do Kwon of Lunar and Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX. Now, the Scorpio lunar eclipse of May the 5th is most similar to the two that toppled those crypto empires.
So this whole period, of March, April, and into early May is where I'm really looking for some of the biggest and most dramatic events of 2023. These are really the most stressful parts of the year, are kind of front-loaded in 2023.
On May the 16th, we'll see Jupiter move into the Venusian Earth sign of Taurus, where it will spend the next year. As we've seen, Jupiter is the planet of justice, of ideals. Last time Jupiter was in Taurus in 2011, we saw the birth of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was campaigning against financial injustice and corruption of the political system. With Jupiter in Taurus once again, look for the appearance of new social movements and campaigns around Taurian themes of finance, food, and resources.
Now, this is an ingress I think is going to be generally positive for 2023. It initially starts off kind of rough with a stressful square to Pluto. However, it immediately moves into a favorable alignment in a conjunction to the North Node. And then that's followed by a very positive, hopeful, and favorable sextile to Saturn, which starts to shape up in the end of May and is really running into exact for most of June and even into July. This is the main aspect alignment of 2023. And for the first time in a couple of years, it's a very hopeful, positive one. Jupiter sextile Saturn brings out the best of both of these planets. And Jupiter represents higher ideals, our highest visions for what our life could be. And that's going to be in that favorable sextile with hardworking, disciplined, focused Saturn. And that is an aspect of wisdom. It's an aspect of success. It's a very favorable aspect historically for the economy and markets. And also, this aspect is going to come back one more time in late December and all the way through into March of 2024. This gives me a somewhat optimistic outlook for 2023. And I think that this indicates that we could have the so-called soft landing. There may be some turbulence and some difficulties, in February, March, and April. However, I am hopeful and optimistic based on this alignment going into May, June, and July.
If we want to know what this Jupiter-Saturn sextile might be signifying, we can also think back to what happened around the time of the conjunction in December 2020. Jupiter-Saturn conjoined in the first degree of Aquarius at that time. And this was when the first COVID vaccines were licensed and began to be offered to citizens of certain countries around the world. Now, China's lunar mission Chang'e 5 successfully collected rocks from the moon. And there were big announcements by Chinese President Xi Jinping and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres about taking action on climate change.
That is why today I call on all leaders worldwide to declare a state of climate emergency in their countries until carbon neutrality is reached.
So with Jupiter and Saturn in sextile, particularly in June, expect some of these themes to be back in the news. Now on July the 22nd, Venus will station retrograde in the sign of Leo.
So Venus typically has a 40-day retrograde period every 18 months. Venus is going to retrograde from 28 Leo back to 12 degrees Leo during the 2023 retro period. Venus is a benefic planet. It's a planet of good luck. It represents the good things in life, the sweetness of life, the comforts of life. Venus represents love and sex and money and good food and good wine, beauty, creativity, and the arts. Leo is a sign of confidence, vanity, and pride. It's the sign of kings. Issues surrounding our vanity, our pride, and our ego, our beauty, and our appearance can come up during this Venus retrograde period. When Venus goes retrograde, the affairs under Venus's purview become more challenging. Old, unfinished business from the past can come up. It's a great time to revisit old friends, and in some cases, an old flame can come back into our lives. For global markets, Venus retro can have a tendency to bring a change of trend. Reversals, setbacks, and sell-offs are common during Venus retrograde periods. However, Venus retro can often bring a major trend reversal. If markets have been in a rally period, it can be a reversal down. We saw this in late 2018. However, if markets have been in a long downtrend, Venus retrograde can actually, some cases, bring an upside rally. In 2023, due to the position of Venus's station to direct, Venus will make a long retrograde square and direct square to Jupiter and Taurus from mid-August to late September. The square between Venus and Jupiter is an aspect of too much of a good thing. It brings out all kinds of overconfidence and excessive behaviors, from spending too much money on things we can't afford to overindulging in food, drink, drugs, and sex. While this can be a feel-good aspect, care needs to be taken in this period to manage energy and resources wisely.
Now in October, we have the second eclipse season of the year. Now on October the 14th, we have a solar eclipse in Libra, the first in Libra for many years.
This is a solar eclipse at 21 degrees Libra, and once again, we see a square to Pluto. This time Pluto will be back in Capricorn. Still, this will bring dramatic changes and upheaval, as squares to Pluto can be very stressful and challenging, again bringing breakdown, destruction, death, and a sweeping away of obsolete systems.
And on October the 28th, we have a lunar eclipse in Taurus, the last one in Taurus for a while.
And this one is interesting. It's a little bit different energy. It's going to be conjunct Jupiter and Taurus. So you'll have Jupiter will be eclipsed. It's also on an almost exact Jupiter-Mars opposition. So the eclipses in 2023, generally speaking, seem to be some of the more stressful aspect alignments of the year. The Jupiter-Mars is certainly concerning for conflicts and war and violence around the world. I think we're going to see, once again, more problems in financial markets and the economy. So in addition to the Jupiter-Saturn sextile earlier in the year of 2023, to that very favorable aspect, we have another interesting and favorable aspect forming in November. Mars, with essential dignity in its home sign of Scorpio, where it's strong, is also going to be Cazimi the Sun, making it into a super Cazimi and giving Mars superpowered strength. Additionally, Mars Cazimi the Sun is going to be in an almost perfect trine to Neptune in Pisces. The Mars trine to Neptune is a spiritual warrior aspect that suggests the pursuit of lofty goals, a selfless battle for a higher cause, fighting for your highest ideals, and the alignment of one's ego and needs with the higher divine plan. The big picture for 2023 is that a lot of the most challenging, stressful energy and aspects are front-loaded into the beginning of the year. But overall, I'd say, I think that 2023 is going to be a more mellow year than 2022. And in fact, than the last couple of years, I think it's going to be a less stressful year overall. And, you know, I'm optimistic that Jupiter-Saturn sextile being the dominant theme of the year, hopefully that brings economic prosperity across the globe for people. And we can really start to move out of this pandemic period.
Now, if you want to know more about what might play out for you over the course of 2023, I'm currently available for natal consultations. You can find the details in the description below. And also available, of course, is Crypto Damus himself.
If you're interested in seeing how the Saturn and Pluto ingresses, the eclipses, shifting signs, and the Saturn-Jupiter sextile, if you're interested in seeing how those are going to affect you personally, you can always contact me for a private consultation and check out my website at astrocryptoreport.com.
Thanks to Crypto Damus for joining me in this episode. If you watch the series on the astrology of the 2020s that I've produced with S.J. Anderson, you'll know that we're expecting some tumultuous astrology and world events later in the 2020s. And if you want to know more about that, I suggest you start with our first video in that series, this one right now.